Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, after much wrangling, Congress moves to avoid a government shutdown with a new funding bill. Top U.S. diplomats meet the new leaders of Syria who overthrew the Assad regime and are now attempting to rebuild the war-torn country. And life in the West Bank following the October 7th Hamas terror attacks has been brutal and unpredictable.
We have no future now. Even for my daughter, she has no future. If they had destroyed the house with us inside, it would have been better.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation, the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Days of chaos and uncertainty on Capitol Hill appear to be winding down. A bill backed by President-elect Donald Trump to keep the government open was rejected by the House last night. But this afternoon, a breakthrough on a very similar agreement was announced by House Speaker Mike Johnson.
We will not have a government shutdown, and we will meet our obligations for our farmers who need aid, for the disaster victims all over the country, and for making sure that military and essential services and everyone who relies upon the federal government for a paycheck is paid over the holidays.
And moments ago, the House passed the bill with bipartisan support. It now heads to the Senate with just hours until the midnight deadline. Lisa Desjardins has been tracking it all on Capitol Hill. So, Lisa, where do things stand right now?
Right, let's take a quick look at the House floor. That vote just completed. This could very well be the last House vote of this Congress. I want to tell you the vote total, 366 votes for this spending bill that would kick things down the road. I'll talk about the details in a second. All of the no votes, 34 of them, were Republicans. So Democrats really helped get this across the finish line here in the House. So what's in this exactly? Let's take a look. First of all, this bill would extend the funding of government funding until about mid-March. It has $100 billion about that for disaster aid. It has $10 billion for farmers. There is not an increase in the debt ceiling. You might be wondering, Lisa, doesn't that look just like a graphic you used the other day? Why, yes, it does. This bill is incredibly similar to a proposal that failed earlier, except for the debt ceiling has been removed. Now, remember, this has been a problem for Republicans up and down. Talking to them this morning, coming out of their caucus meeting, it was clear they were very eager to be unified and to be positive.
And what did you hear from Democrats in terms of how they were able to get to yes?
Right. Well, I want to talk about the Democrats say that they want to make sure that government doesn't get shut down. I think part of this was coming out of that Republican meeting. Republicans were trying to be unified and to be positive and to get Democrats on board. Let's listen to what they said.
I think we came together. I think Speaker Johnson did a great job come the end of the day. I think there's very good communication happening with the White House, and which is crucial.
Now, what's notable here, Jeff, is when they say the White House, House Republicans are talking about President-elect Trump. So throughout all of this, it was as if Trump was already president. But I want to note, in the end, he did not get what he wanted. Here's what Trump posted on social media just in the last day about what he wanted. He wrote on social media, and I want to show you exactly what he wrote. Here it is. He wrote, Congress must get rid of the ridiculous debt ceiling. Without this, Republicans should never make a deal. Well, in the end, they did make a deal. Now, part of this deal is a handshake agreement between House Republicans and Trump to increase the debt ceiling next year by $1.5 trillion, but also have some cuts that would go along with it.
So what does all of this mean for the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, his leadership moving forward?
Yeah, we're waiting to see what the Senate does tonight. I want to update folks on the shutdown itself because that is coming at midnight. The Senate could move quickly. It is possible the Senate could pass this deal by midnight or shortly after. So it looks like if we have a shutdown, it could be a technically short one. That's if the full Senate goes along. So we need to watch that carefully. But Mike Johnson, absolutely, he is not out of hot water yet. At least one of his Republican members today, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, told me he is a hard no on Johnson continuing to be Speaker. Let's listen to what he said.
You can change the name over the Speaker's office, but until you change the way this place works, you're not really going to get different results. I have a different operating theory on this Speaker's vote, which is Mike Johnson's not qualified to be Speaker.
Now, with the margin that Johnson will have in the next session, he really cannot lose any more members and keep the speakership. So over the course of this recess, there will be an important moment for the Speaker. I did confirm that in one of the meetings in the past day with his number two, Steve Scalise, next to him, Johnson half joked, half didn't joke. If anyone else can get 218 votes, meaning a majority, God bless them. Steve Scalise, someone who has eyed the speakership before. He's not the only one, but there will be a real moment on January 3rd when the next Congress begins, a test for him.
So, Lisa, help us understand. Despite the chaos we've seen over the last few days, it appears Congress has voted and approved, at least the House so far has voted and approved, a spending bill that, for the most part, mirrored what they started with, minus this effort to raise the debt ceiling. Is that right?
That's exactly correct. And I'm glad you're pointing this out. Two things here. First of all, the House knew this was coming since September. All of Congress knew this was coming since September. And so did President-elect Trump. Now, what happened here is there was a very large bill that Speaker Johnson negotiated with Democrats that he presented to his chairman, but did not get them to weigh in on. That bill had essentially these items in it, plus more policy, a bunch more spending in it, and some health care policy. Then President-elect Trump and Elon Musk weighed in. They wanted the debt ceiling. So Speaker Johnson added that. That didn't work. Now that's been taken out. Essentially, we've gone through all of this as a sort of learning curve for both Speaker Johnson and President-elect Trump as to how the House can work and also how it doesn't work. One other thing I want to hit on really quickly in the end here is about the debt itself. This was a pervasive and important substantive issue to many of the Republicans who were negotiating here with their own party. And looking at this debt deal, I want to describe what their handshake deal is with President-elect Trump. They made a deal to increase the debt ceiling, or they said they would try, by $1.5 trillion in the spring or in January or so. And in exchange, they want to find $2.5 trillion in mandatory spending cuts. That's a level we've never seen before. That may not be easy to do. And of course, they would need agreement from the Senate as well. But this is the deal they have with Trump. Now, a reminder to folks, currently the U.S. national debt stands at $36 trillion. And that level is going up and up. The interest on the debt is nearing $1 trillion a year. So that's why this is a concern. It is a substantive issue for many of these Republicans. And that's not going to go away, nor will the complexity of dealing with it in the next Congress. It may only get harder.
Lisa Desjardins, our deep thanks to you, as always. All right, for more insight, let's bring in Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona, who joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Jeff, thank you for having me. And Lisa is truly one of the very best here.
I'd have to agree with you on that. Thanks for making note of it. So help us understand, you opposed the first two funding bills, but you voted in support of the funding bill tonight. Why?
The debt ceiling was removed from it. For those of us, I will hopefully be chairing the Joint Economic Committee, but I'm also in Ways and Means. The opportunity to now step in and say, here's the modernizations, here's some of the spending reductions, those things. I now have a path to move those things forward. And let's be honest, the previous setup on the vote had all sorts of things that I believe were Christmas treed in, and then functionally a substantial increase in the debt ceiling with actually no understanding of that that's a stressor around here. And we almost only do our work when there's a stressor.
The version of the bill that failed last night, the bill that had the debt ceiling increase that Donald Trump supported, 38 Republicans voted against it. You were one of them. What should we what should we take away from that? I mean, does it show the limits of Mr. Trump's influence and power among the House GOP?
Jeff, I would actually take you a slightly different direction. In some ways, it was less about President Trump or even Mr. Musk. It's the fact of the matter is we now live in a time where so far this fiscal year, so what we're 70 days into this fiscal year, we're borrowing over $100,000 every second. It's demographics. It's the interest on the debt now is starting to chew us up. And it's constantly this battle of people want things. There's lines of lobbyists and groups in these hallways wanting things, and almost no one wants to actually talk about how do we pay for it.
You mentioned Elon Musk. I mean, given that you are a vocal fiscal hawk, what do you make of the fact that you have this unelected multi-billionaire with a number of vested interests, many would argue conflicts of interests, calling the shots on something that should be the prerogative of elected members of Congress?
I'm actually think it's wonderful. If you have someone with a freaky high IQ who's willing to, in some ways, evangelize, saying we need to modernize how we deliver healthcare, how we deliver government, what we do, because the fact of the matter is, intellectually, Congress, the reporting class, others are almost fearful to tell the public just the scale. Look, we're borrowing so far this fiscal year $8.7 billion every single day. And yet the triteness of so many of the solutions we get, if this actually raises the profile, I know people want to take a shot at someone because of what they do and those things, but how much of the public actually understands we're clicking off $1 trillion of borrowing about every 118 days? If this actually sharpens the mind, sharpens the intellect to actually deal with the reality of our demographics, 100% of the debt so today through the next 10 years is interest and health care. It's demographics. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican, it's what we are as a society.
I take your point about shaking up the status quo. What about the process? For Americans watching this new era of GOP control start with really chaos and manufactured crisis, you could argue, what should the American people take away from that?
In some ways, oh God, forgive me for how I'm going to say this. This is the reality when you don't have bundles of free cash to hand out to people to buy their votes. In a previous era, when you had someone that wanted something, you say, all right, we'll build that bridge, we'll do that road, and that's how you took care of their desires for their vote. Today, we don't have that bank account to buy votes. Now we have to deal with the honor, the facts of the math, and the math will always eventually win here. So things are going to be more difficult, but this is the reality of the avoidance of the last decade of telling the truth, what our demographics have brought us.
What's your assessment of House Speaker Mike Johnson's leadership so far?
He's done fine. Look, building, one of the things, and forgive me, I might be a bit pathological optimistic here. One of what we went through in the last 36 hours was building a rhythm of how do you deal with very difficult math when you have only 1 or 2 vote margin, and build the model of how do you listen to people. Someone like myself that's from a very well-educated district, I represent the Phoenix Scottsdale area, compared to someone that may have a rural district or other districts that haven't had the same opportunity as my population.
There are lots of educated people in rural areas, but
No, but the point is, is we all come with different desires. If you actually take a look at like some of the no votes, it was more, we wanted more aid for what's happening in agricultural America. You had others that it's an issue of what's happening in the middle of the country compared to the coasts. So we got to be very careful that this isn't populists versus conservatives versus liberals, that it's an understanding that the movement of how we vote is actually much more complex.
Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona, thanks for your time this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we start the day's other headlines with an unfolding tragedy in Germany, where a car drove at high speed through a crowd of people at a Christmas market in the northeastern city of Magdeburg. At least 2 people are dead and dozens are injured. A German media outlet reports the death toll could be as high as 11. Officials believe this was a deliberate attack, and the suspect, a 50-year-old Saudi doctor, has been arrested. Residents and visitors were in a state of shock and called the attack a dark day for the city, so close to the holidays.
We are shaking. We are full of sympathy for the relatives. Also, we hope that nothing has happened to our relatives, friends, and acquaintances.
This week marks the anniversary of an attack on a Berlin Christmas market 8 years ago, where an extremist drove a truck through a crowd and killed 13 people. Ukraine and Russia traded deadly missile strikes today. A Russian official says Ukraine struck inside the Kursk border region with U.S.-supplied weapons, killing at least 6 people, including a child. Eyewitness video caught scenes of destruction and panic. Ukrainian soldiers have held part of Kursk ever since a surprise incursion earlier this year. Meantime, in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, officials say 1 person was killed in a Russian missile attack during morning rush hour. Ukraine's foreign ministry also said Russia endangered other countries' diplomats.
As a result of the missile attack, several embassies were damaged. You can see a car with diplomatic plates that belongs to one of the diplomatic institutions. Here's the interior of the embassy. All of these embassies are housed in the same building, which was heavily damaged by the Russian strike.
Moscow claimed its attack was retaliation for a Ukrainian strike on Russian soil earlier this week that used American-made weapons. Back here at home, baristas at a handful of Starbucks stores went on a 5-day strike today after contract negotiations reached an apparent standstill.
No contract?
No coffee. Union organizers said the walk-offs happened at about 10 stores in the Los Angeles, Seattle, and Chicago areas, and the strike could expand to hundreds of cafes by Christmas Eve. The coffee giant said in a statement that there would be no significant impact to its operations. The Biden administration announced today that it would forgive another $4 billion in student loan debt for roughly 55,000 borrowers who work in public service. The relief is a result of fixes the Education Department made to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The president has forgiven more student debt than any other president, waiving $180 billion for nearly 5 million people with student debt. But Republican-led legal challenges have hindered the president's efforts at delivering wide-scale relief. Party City, the once popular party supply store, is closing its doors after nearly 40 years in business, according to CNN. The store's corporate employees were told today would be their last day as the company winds down operations. It comes as the discount store Big Lots also prepares to shut its doors amid its own bankruptcy. Both chains have struggled against online competitors like Amazon. And on Wall Street, stocks turned around what's been a dismal week of losses to end on a somewhat high note. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained nearly 500 points on the day. The Nasdaq notched its own big gain of nearly 200 points, and the S&P also finished up by more than a percentage point. Still to come on the NewsHour, David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on Donald Trump's decision to complicate a congressional funding deal. And a court wrangles over who owns a Vibe after one social media influencer sues another for copying her look.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
American diplomats were in Syria today for the first time since the U.S. shut its embassy in Damascus in 2012. They met with Syria's de facto new ruler, Ahmed al-Shara, and announced that the $10 million bounty the U.S. placed on him would be removed. Assistant Secretary of State Barbara Leaf told reporters al-Shara was committed to ensuring that terrorist groups cannot pose a threat inside Syria or to other countries.
I would characterize the discussion as quite good, very productive, detailed. We ranged over a wide set of issues, domestic and external. He came across as pragmatic. It was a good first meeting. We will judge by deeds, not just by words.
U.S. officials also said they're expanding their search for Austin Tice, the American journalist who was kidnapped in Damascus 12 years ago. For perspective, we turn now to Theodore Katouf. He was U.S. ambassador to Syria during the George W. Bush administration. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Help us understand the significance of the U.S. dropping the $10 million bounty it had offered for the Syrian rebel leader whose forces led to the ouster of Bashar al-Assad.
Well, I think it's a very positive sign. Ahmed al-Shara at one point was an Islamic stater. At another point, he was al-Qaeda. Then he had his own offshoot in Syria, the Nusra Front. But he and the organization, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, seems to have evolved and recognized that they can't rule Syria, they can't govern Syria without changing, to some extent, their Islamic or Islamist ideology and being inclusive and much more tolerant, because Syria is a mosaic of many minorities, with the Sunnis perhaps being the majority, but within that grouping of Sunni Muslims, there are many secularists or many people who don't want Islamist rule.
What is the U.S. interest in Syria right now?
Well, I think the first interest is that it doesn't become a cockpit for exporting terrorism, as Afghanistan was, and the like. And Syria has ISIS still out in the desert, in the western desert of Syria. And the United States has about 2,000 troops there. We've recently increased the number of troops. And they are there to work with the what's known as the Syrian Democratic Front, but is largely a Kurdish organization, military organization, to root out ISIS. And the Kurds actually guard some very huge prisons containing thousands of ISIS fighters and their families.
Is it in the U.S. interest, then, to lift sanctions, to provide more humanitarian aid, and to encourage other countries to do the same?
I think it is. I mean, Barbara Leaf, our Assistant Secretary, who we just heard from, it's her job as a diplomat to be positive and hopeful. But in this case, I think it's the right thing to do, because Ahmed Shara recognizes that he has a country in ruins. And people are suffering, and he has to deliver for them. If he wants to consolidate HTS's position in Syria and stamp out resistance, then people have to have hope. And that hope will come through the international community first providing humanitarian aid, but then reconstruction aid, and even help with governance. And Shara seems to me a very astute fellow who's learned a lot and come a long way. I'm not saying he couldn't reverse himself. Plenty of leaders have. Mm-hmm. I'm old enough to remember Castro in Cuba, who told us he was a Democrat back in '59 and '60, right, and turned out to be a communist leader. So people can say one thing and do another. Ahmed Shara not only has to talk the talk, he's going to have to walk the walk.
You've just articulated one of the immediate risks that Syria faces. What are some of the others right now after the fall of Assad?
Oh, there are so many, Jeff. The civil war is really not over. We have a truce between Turkish or Turkish-backed forces and the Kurdish forces I just referred to in northeastern Syria, but it's only a matter of days before that truce expires. So we could see, again, fighting in that area. Not only that, but we could see more extremist elements from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or other allied organizations trying to push Shara aside because he's too moderate. We also have many other things that can happen. I mentioned ISIS and them gaining a bigger foothold and expanding their reach in Syria. And of course, Israel's been taking territory on the Golan that was supposed to be demilitarized in an agreement between Hafez al-Assad and the then Israeli government. And that's putting pressure on Shara too. He doesn't want a problem with Israel. He doesn't want to have to be a confrontational leader. But they're embarrassing him badly.
The outgoing administration is engaged in this frantic round of diplomacy, but President-elect Donald Trump has made clear that Syria, as he says, is not our fight. How might his anti-interventionist worldview affect the U.S. approach moving forward, and what might that mean for Syria?
Well, first of all, we have been working with the Kurds in northeastern Syria since about 2012. You had Ambassador Jeffries, I believe, on this show, who said we never had an agreement with the Kurds for an independent Kurdish state or even a quite autonomous region. But there was a moral obligation there. The Kurds have been abandoned more than once by the U.S. and the West. And if a slaughter takes place there, their blood is going to be on U.S. hands. And Turkey has said not only is ISIS a terrorist organization, but the Syrian Democratic Forces, i.e. the Kurds, are also a terrorist organization, something, of course, we don't agree with. Our interest is that Syria not be a totally failed state, and ISIS and other organizations, Al-Qaeda, not be able to export terrorism to the West and to Europe and the like. And if Trump pulls out too quickly, if he throws up his hands and says, I'm not giving any aid, let the Arabs worry about it, et cetera, without U.S. leadership, things could deteriorate very quickly. So I'm hoping his advisors can talk him into let's say, a more moderate withdrawal. Since he criticized the withdrawal from Afghanistan, we shouldn't repeat that.
Ambassador Ted Khattouf, thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Overnight, in the northern reaches of the occupied West Bank, a mosque was vandalized and set on fire by Israeli settlers, whose attacks against Palestinians there have increased greatly since the October 7th terror attacks. Israel describes the West Bank as one of 7 fronts it's fighting on, stoked by Iranian support of Palestinian militants. On a recent trip, Nick Schifrin traveled to the Jenin refugee camp, the epicenter of much of the violence. He begins his story in a nearby village.
It is a window into life in the occupied West Bank, what was once a sanctuary reduced to rubble.
I've been building this house for 15 years. It took them 45 minutes to demolish it and leave.
Jonas Hassan and his 2-year-old daughter Jaffa stand at the wreckage of the home he spent nearly half his life building. He just finished it. Jaffa's trampoline in the living room, family dancing in the kitchen. But in September, an Israeli bulldozer tore it down. Israel told him he didn't have a construction permit, which Palestinians and the UN say is nearly impossible to obtain.
If I wanted to build a house like this again, it would take me 100 years. I'll be in my grave before I can finish it.
The family says it's lived on this land for 100 years. Israel has for decades bulldozed West Bank homes in the name of counterterrorism. But the UN says this year Israel demolished the highest number of structures since records began 15 years ago. And since October the 7th, Israel has blocked Hassan's and some 150,000 West Bank Palestinians' livelihood by suspending their work permits that gave them access as day workers to Israel just beyond the wall.
Before October 7, I used to work in Israel. I used to work construction there, and they knew who I was, and they liked me. But since October 7, if I said hi, they don't respond. They'd shoot at me. We have no future now. Even for my daughter, she has no future. I ask what happened to the house, and she says the army flattened it. If they had destroyed the house with us inside, it would have been better.
That defeatism toward death is shared even by those responsible for saving life.
We are both living and we're not. You don't know if your child leaves the house, if they'll be back safe. or even if I leave the house, you never know what could happen.
Wasef Suleiman Rawajbi has been a paramedic in Jenin for 18 years. He and international NGOs accuse Israeli forces since October the 7th of targeting healthcare facilities, workers, and ambulances.
Before October 7th, the stop and searches were fewer. Today, they have no problem shooting at anyone. They'll kill anyone.
The epicenter of the recent violence in the West Bank has been the Jenin refugee camp. In late August, Israel launched its largest West Bank raids in 20 years. Israel calls the camp the crucible of Palestinian militancy. Another round of raids last month targeted what Israel labeled terrorists who'd attacked Israeli settlers and soldiers. Israel calls the Jenin fighting urban warfare at its most difficult because militants are embedded in the city and even throw explosives at Israeli soldiers from mosques. The Israeli military campaign here has intensified, using tactics that used to be unheard of, airstrikes. This is a mosque in the Jenin refugee camp hit by Israeli jets. And locals tell me they're not going to rebuild it because they fear that if they did, Israel would hit it again. The UN established the camp and others like it for Palestinians forced from their homes during Israel's independence in 1948. At first, it was controlled by Jordan. It's been occupied by Israel since 1967. Today, some 14,000 of their descendants live here, and it has among the highest rates of unemployment and poverty across the West Bank.
The people are living in a sort of tough situation, a stressful situation. There's been increasing pressure on people during this time.
Sheikh Ismail Abdel Fattah Jaradat is one of the imams at the main refugee camp mosque. He says the toll on West Bank civilians since October the 7th has been high. The UN says at least 730 have been killed, including 3 children every week. Israel's recent Jenin raids left dug-up roads and burned in bullet-marked homes. It is no place to grow up or to parent, says Jaradat.
They're growing up around pressure and terror and killing. So of course they're going to grow up abnormally, with abnormal thoughts. During the last invasion, where the army came in around 11, right in the middle of the day, I had to go pull my son out of school. And the scene there was terrified parents, worried for their children. When the army comes in during this time, it's intentional to terrorize people.
Israel argues the terrorism is Palestinian. Last week, Israelis who established settlements in the West Bank held a funeral for a 12-year-old killed by a Palestinian at a bus station. And in early October, Israel says Palestinians from the West Bank attacked this train station south of Tel Aviv and killed at least 7 people, their bodies left on the sidewalk.
West Bank is one of the 7 fronts that Israel fights against the axis of resistance led by Iran.
Asaf Arayan is a retired Israeli brigadier general whose last job was leading the Israeli Defense Forces strategic planning. Now he's a fellow at the Washington Institute of International Peace. We spoke when I returned from the West Bank.
The job there is to keep the situation relatively stable and keep terror down. So a famous Israeli term for that was mowing the lawn. Since tall grass allows the snakes to proliferate, you go after explosive laboratories, you go after bands of armed gunmen.
Jenin's militants are an umbrella of armed groups that today are supplied by weapons, including these from Iran. They target Israel and the Palestinian Authority that governs part of the West Bank. This past weekend, Palestinian police fought militants in Jenin in an operation the Palestinian Prime Minister called an attempt to re-establish law and order.
This is to save the people in Jenin from the chaos they're living in and to save the nation.
West Bank chaos also comes from violence launched by Jewish residents who have moved to the West Bank in what the international community calls illegal settlements. This year, the UN has tracked more than 1,400 incidents, the highest in years.
Settlers' appetite for friction, which is, I would say, an expression of their feeling that the government is supportive. And at the same time, the huge weakening of police and law enforcement.
In the occupied West Bank, the Israeli army is responsible for Palestinians, but arresting settlers is the responsibility of the Israeli police, who are not doing their job, argue Orion and other security officials.
If the Israeli police is disinclined, is showing its weak hand against those aggressors, so there's no law enforcement. We can add to that recently the newly appointed Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, just said that administrative arrests for Jews will not be used anymore. That's a big step backwards when you try to deter Jewish terrorism.
Those administrative arrests, when Israeli security forces hold suspects without charge, has helped push the number of Palestinian detainees from 5,000 to 15,000.
The arrests were different after October 7th. Israeli police were arresting people in masses, in raids, and the arrests became more violent.
You've been a lawyer for more than 10 years. You've been working.
Hamza Kuta is a Jerusalem-based lawyer for Palestinian detainees. He and the UN Human Rights Office accuse Israel of a wave of arbitrary and punitive arrests. They allege abuse, including of Muazzaz Obayat, a healthy bodybuilder, before he was detained. The UN also says at least 53 Palestinian prisoners from the West Bank and Gaza died while in custody, including Ter Abu Asab, who was serving a 20-year sentence for attempting to bomb a checkpoint. At least 19 guards were detained in his death.
Without a doubt, the Israelis are using torture in their prisons, sometimes even leading to the death of detainees. They were tortured, mattresses taken away, leaving them in the cold. They were also subjected to psychological and mental torture by staying in the dark and lessening the amount of food they were given.
Israel's prison authority, which is overseen by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far-right national security minister, has said repeatedly, quote, all prisoners are detained according to the provisions of the law. But Ben-Gvir has publicly feuded with Israel's other security agencies, which have criticized prison conditions.
I am surprised by my misfortune in recent days. I have dealt with the question if Palestinian prisoners should have a fruit basket or not. And I say Palestinian prisoners must be killed, shot in the head.
All of this adds up to tensions remaining high.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not on a reconciliation path. There's not a political process in sight.
And so the cycles of violence will continue. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin in Jenin.
Congress spent the week on yet another chaotic down-to-the-wire funding battle. So as we close out the week, we turn tonight to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. Jonathan, I'll start with you. What's your assessment of the drama surrounding this government funding battle? Keeping the government funded is the basic function of Congress. It should be this straightforward, non-controversial process, not the source of political brinksmanship, and yet,
non-controversial. I love that description because it hasn't been that way since Kevin McCarthy was Speaker of the House. Look, you had Speaker Johnson negotiating in good faith, if you listen to congressional Democrats, with them to come up with what we can now call Plan A. It wasn't what Speaker Johnson had promised his caucus. It was more than 1,000-page bill, had lots of stuff in it, but it kept the government open. It got disaster aid. It did a bunch of things. And what was it, Monday? Early in the morning, Elon Musk starts tweeting against it. Then President-elect Donald Trump joins in. You can't expect anything to get passed if you swoop in at the last minute and blow up the deal, and then blow up the second deal by saying, oh, we should just eliminate the debt ceiling, when you've got people in your own conference who ran on cutting the debt and things like that. And so what happened this week, to me, was not surprising. What is surprising is that they actually got a deal done, and they got it passed with a lot of votes.
And David, there have been those Republicans who have said that by taking aim at the Washington status quo, that Donald Trump did exactly what he said he would do on the campaign trail. And, especially since the government is viewed with such distrust by those on the populist right.
Yeah, I thought I had a positive week with this. I thought all parties had a piece of the truth. So Donald Trump was absolutely right. We should get rid of the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is sort of a sham procedure. If we want to cut spending and do fiscal discipline, we should do it during the appropriations process or the authorization process, not with this weird thing called the debt ceiling. The second people who were right were the 38 Republicans who defied Donald Trump, who said if we're going to get rid of the debt ceiling, we should actually cut spending. And they were right about that. But then Speaker Johnson was also right that this is not the time. In the hours before a government shutdown, you can't do something massive like cutting $1.2 trillion out of the federal budget. So I think Speaker Johnson did the right thing. And Donald Trump learned a lesson, which is there's realities here. You can say things on the campaign trail, but there are realities in governance. And the realities often have to do with a timetable. And Donald Trump weighed in at the wrong time. If he wants to do it when he's president, fine. He's on the right course on this. But you can't just do it just at the last minute when you're not even president yet. And so I think what we learned is that at first 38 and then hundreds of Republicans defied Donald Trump in order to deal with the reality in front of them.
Jonathan, David mentioned Elon Musk. I mean, what about his influence? Because, he led the rebellion against the initial bill, as you mentioned. And the Post reported that his swift accumulation of political power has sparked criticism that the incoming Trump administration will function like an oligarchy.
Well, yeah, because remember, this all got started not because Donald Trump weighed in first. Elon Musk weighed in, and I just start calling him the first buddy. He is in on all the phone calls. He's in on all the meetings. No one elected him to anything. No one. And yet Republicans on the Hill listened to what he had to say. Donald Trump listened to what he had to say. There's a reason why Democrats this week we're calling him President Musk, and then calling Donald Trump Donald Trump. If what we saw this week is prologue for what the Trump administration is going to be like, what the 119th Congress is going to be like, we should be prepared for continual weeks like the one we had now.
David, what does this suggest about what we can expect moving forward, especially as Donald Trump will likely have to renew his tax cut plan, and he says he wants to embark upon this mass deportation of undocumented immigrants? That's going to take coordinating with Congress to a certain degree.
Again, it's reality. First on Elon Musk, Donald Trump's been against the debt ceiling for a long time. He didn't need Elon Musk to tell him that. As for Elon Musk, this bromance is going to end in tears. I give it 30 days, maybe 60 days, something like that. We're all going to be crying as they part ways and they start taking shots at each other. I don't expect Elon Musk to be around for very long, but presidents get to have advisors. And if Elon Musk can do some good, then maybe he can do some good. I mean, one of the things that even Democrats are saying is that they missed a chance when they were in office to reform government. If you're trying to improve the Medicare, if you're trying to improve the delivery of veteran services, there are government rules and regulations that impinge and block you from actually improving the way government works. And sensible Democrats know that, and they should have done something about it. If Elon Musk, some billionaire, walks in and can reform some of the rules that are impinging the way the government works, all to it. I don't expect that to happen, but what I expect is that Donald Trump has some right instincts about immigration, about reforming government, but he does not know anything about the reality of governance. And so my posture right now is, let's let him try. He's got some instincts that are terrible and some instincts that are not terrible. And let's let him try. But change in government is just phenomenally hard. And you have to really know what you're doing. And neither Donald Trump nor Elon Musk really knows how the game's played.
Jonathan, where was President Biden in all of this? And I raise the question because at one point Donald Trump posted on social media, if there's going to be a shutdown of government, let it begin now under the Biden administration, not after January 20th under Trump. And no response from President Biden himself. He really seems to have abdicated the bully pulpit.
No. Why should President Biden get in the middle of a Republican on Republican food fight melee? Why should he? If this were any other time, any other president, everyone would be saying the president is staying out of it because when your opponent is digging the hole, just let them dig the hole. So that's what I think was up with President Biden. As for Elon Musk, just to go back, David, I will not be crying when the bromance implodes. And while I understand that government needs to be reformed and regulations need to be tightened, the thing that concerns me most about the world's richest person being in charge of an agency that doesn't really have any power, it's going to be Congress that has to do something. I don't really know what his values are. I mean, David's values are right and true. Fix Medicaid, fix Medicare, fix Social Security. I don't know if that is what Elon Musk is going to be focused on.
Well, this is the final Brooks and Capehart before the holidays, and this has been quite a year, gentlemen. So much tumult in the world, so much uncertainty and churn and change. But I want to ask you the one thing that you find yourself most grateful for. And David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm in D.C. I'm in New York right now. I'm a few blocks away from the Christmas tree. And this this holiday season is, it's a time that's more alive. We all remember this as kids. We're just more alive. There was a 2nd century Christian saint named St. Irenaeus, and he said, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. So you walk over to the tree up Fifth Avenue here, and you watch the children with the glory in their eyes, and you can't help think this is a special, magical season. If you're not a believer, if you are a believer, for those of us who are believers, it's a season when the Lord is more present in the world, just because the radical reality of God coming down and being born in a manger that smells like dung, that's just magical. And so you see it right there on the streets, right all around me.
How about you, Jonathan?
I mean, I can't even top that. I mean, I don't know about grateful. I mean, I answered this question during Thanksgiving. I guess my answer is a little more political, and I don't think of it as grateful as much as what brings me optimism for the new year. And what brings me optimism is the 50.1% of the American people who voted for someone other than Donald Trump. And that brings me optimism because after he's inaugurated on January 20th, it is going to be those Americans who will be called upon to defend American values, to defend their communities, and to defend their loved ones for whatever may come their way from a new Trump administration.
Optimism seems to be in short supply in our politics these days. I mean, David, what can we look to feel better about the current state of our politics?
Postponement. I've decided to postpone my panic. Terrible things may happen. I'm going to wait for it. I'm not going to react to everything Donald Trump says. I'm not going to panic until there's time to panic. And maybe there'll come time in January and February things will be really harsh. But right now, I'm just going to enjoy the holiday season.
Yeah. Well, David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, our best to you both and your families at this holiday season.
Thanks so
much.
Jeff. Same to you.
Appreciate it.
Same to you, David.
Jeff.
Who owns a vibe? That question is at the heart of a lawsuit where one online influencer is suing another for copyright infringement. 24-year-old Sydney Gifford claims that Alyssa Shiel, a 21-year-old fellow influencer, knowingly replicated her aesthetic and her posts on social media. Amna Nawaz spoke to Sandra E. Garcia of the New York Times, who has been covering this story extensively.
Sandra E. Garcia, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, glad to be here.
All right, so let's start with these influencers, Sydney Gifford and Alyssa Shiel. Just tell us a little bit more about who they are.
Alyssa Shiel is a 21-year-old influencer who, uses her time to suggest things that her followers should buy off of her Amazon marketplace. Sydney Gifford is similar to her in that way. They're both, young women looking for items to inspire people to buy on their social media accounts.
And their vibe, their aesthetic is what? How would you describe what it is that they're putting out to their followers?
The way they would describe it themselves is very minimalistic, beige, not very busy, cool girl, oversized sweaters, chunky knits, clear sort of plastic Amazon basics. They like things to look very clean and neat.
And what is the relationship between these two women? They've actually professionally collaborated before, is that right?
They were influencers that followed each other at one point, and they met up to hang out, and they took some pictures of themselves to post and to brainstorm things that they could post on their social media accounts. And then their relationship sort of dissolved when Alyssa Shield unfollowed Sydney Gifford.
So the idea that you can sue someone over an aesthetic, how does that work? Like, what is the case that's being made in federal court right now?
Well, Sydney Gifford noticed that Alyssa's post started looking a lot like hers a year after their initial hangout, whether that is the aesthetic, the vibe, the minimalistic style, the clean style, even at some point, some poses and some outfits she details in her lawsuit that she filed. The lawsuit basically says that she got her vibe, her whole look from Sydney Gifford. And Sydney is saying that she has infringed on her profit, right? Because they use their social media accounts to promote their Amazon marketplace, where they can influence people to buy things off of Amazon, and Amazon pays them a commission to do so. And because of that, Sydney has brought this lawsuit in federal court against Alyssa.
And in your reporting, you quote a professor of intellectual property law who explains that in this whole online space, there's an idea that you are both a creator and a borrower. So how hard is it to lay claim to an aesthetic, something intangible like a vibe?
It is such a layered issue. The algorithm, feeds you similar posts, similar creators, similar influencers. If I see a rug and I take a picture on that rug, and it just so happens that another influencer took a picture on the rug a similar way, we could have both reached that last photograph by following a lot of different influencers, celebrities. And so it's hard to say that an aesthetic was reached because of one other influencer, especially when it's such a popular aesthetic. The minimalistic, beige, concrete, neat, clean girl look is very popular right now. And the algorithm is feeding followers and influencers the same kind of posts. And so it's hard to say that this one influencer copied the other, as opposed to the algorithm fed her a million other posts that got her to that endpoint.
And as you've noted in your reporting, there is an entire economy built around this kind of content creation. So when it comes to this legal case, what's at stake here? What's the potential impact of how this case goes?
It is an unprecedented case, and it could really change the content creator world and the economy, because influencers can now be beholden to copyright law, and they would have to be careful how they arrange things. If one person owns an aesthetic, then another person can say they own another aesthetic. And suddenly we're not building on these different vibes and social media looks. We are sort of stifling the content creator world if this case moves forward and it's ruled in favor of Ms. Gifford.
It's a fascinating case. We're going to be following your reporting to see how it goes. Sandra E. Garcia of the New York Times, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And there's a lot more online, including a story about a push to finalize compensation for veterans with a debilitating lung condition before the end of the Biden administration. That's at pbs.org/newshour. And be sure to watch Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight on PBS. Moderator Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel discuss Elon Musk's influence over President-elect Trump and congressional Republicans. And on PBS News Weekend, a humanitarian aid worker recounts the need of children who've been affected in a year marred by multiple wars. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Amna and I will see you after the holidays. Have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm terribly excited to be the anchor of PBS News Weekend. We have become known for independent, fact-based reporting. We're challenging the viewers to understand the world a little better. We present all sides of a story. We take the time to put them in context. When viewers watch PBS News Weekend, I hope they come away informed and perhaps a different perspective than they had thought of before. Good evening, I'm John Yang. Tonight on PBS News Weekend.
You're watching PBS.